All right, I'm going to try something here real quick, not get too complicated, but kind of go through what I think might be going on when we experience awe. So I'm going to start over here and just conceptualize the back half of the brain here is for sensation, sensory input. The front part of the brain, with a caveat, is for movement. Our motor cortex is here, sensory cortex here, visual cortex here, auditory cortex there, kind of stuff. And then this gets us moving. But to say that our emotions, the physiology of emotions, comes through to the frontal part of the brain and it gets us to do something. Emotions, the physiology tells us to move, and when that physiology gets to the cortex, that's when we're aware of a feeling, okay? So what I've represented here in this red is the medial prefrontal cortex, which to me has a major role in preventing us from experiencing awe. We live very much up in this part of our brain. We're a really weak species. We need each other, and so we evolved. The brain sort of grew forward in a very complex social cortex, things that help us bond and connect and work together. And then we stacked on top of it, going up this way, sort of our intellect and our ability to invent and create and hold complex problems in our heads and play with them and that type of thing. So a big part of what we do is live in this part of our head, because social connection is so important to us. We're constantly sort of judging the environment, like, okay, should I move or should I not move, right? Should I, if something comes through like I want to, I have to, an impulse, we're constantly monitoring whether that emotional impulse coming through is appropriate to sort of exhibit. And so the medial prefrontal cortex takes all this sort of all these constructs up in the front part of our brain about the life going on around us and how we're connected and what we should be doing and what we shouldn't be doing. And if it sees an emotion comes through that it thinks, nah, that's not really appropriate right now, it'll shove it back down, And so that's where we practice this art of sort of repressing emotions, is that if it's not going to be appropriate in the moment, we'll shove it back down. So we spend a whole lot of time up here in this part of our brain. And so this stuff down here represents this sort of down into the midbrain, raphe nucleus for serotonin, locus coeruleus, norepinephrine, ventral tegmentum, dopamine. And those are sort of the flood of neurotransmitters that come up with the physiology of emotions. And then they're also the things that we inhibit and block and shove back down based on what we think is most appropriate at the time, what we must do, what we have to do, all the, what you should do, all those types of things kind of hold that down. But when they're in tension, when the emotions really want to come flying through and the medial prefrontal cortex saying, no, don't do it, not now, not ever, we get a little conflict. Conflict gets represented in the anterior cingulate and then lights up the amygdala here. So the amygdala gets active and we get a little hyper-focused on sort of this internal dialogue in our head, and sometimes miss out on the world that's going on around us, okay? So, and then this little green blob, that's to represent the insula, kind of our visceral sensations, and where we actually get to feel emotions when they're allowed to come through. So here, wildly, now, I've gone over, and this is really inexplainable, but this is a face, and so this guy is having some kind of sensory input, and let's say that it's really pleasant, it's inspiring, it's awe-provoking kind of sensory input, and that could be something visual, something through the auditory system, something through the olfactory and gustatory system, a really good meal or really good smell or something like that, or perhaps really good touch, something that just, it seems incredibly potent in terms of a sensory overflow. So from here, we get all of this coming through, and all of a sudden, this back part of our brain, the sensory part of our brain, sort of becomes overwhelmed with stimulus. So in this model, that would turn down the medial prefrontal cortex, that governor, that social regulator, the have to, need to, should stuff. It would go offline or relatively down-regulated. And when that happens, this striatal flow comes through. So I've sort of demonstrated this here, where all of a sudden now we have sort of this flooding of dopamine and serotonin and a little bit of norepinephrine. I'm sure there's probably GABA in there somewhere, kind of this monoamine flow coming through that literally spins up through the cortex of the brain this way, and then comes up kind of underneath to the older cortex of the brain, to the insula and to the cingulate cortex, comes up this way and distributes all of these wonderful feeling neurotransmitters to those parts of the brain when we take this break, this governor off of the system. And so there's probably other ways, there are other ways we can turn the governor off. Even threat will turn the governor off to some degree, and we'll experience kind of a different flow of emotions, but the emotions will come through more readily. So that is, you know, kind of a really crude representation of what I think may be going on with just an incredible sort of overwhelming sensory input. All of a sudden we get this shift to the back of the brain. With that happening, the brain doesn't sustain this. It puts its attention to this, you know, all these wonderful sensory sort of inputs coming through. And when we turn off this governor, all of a sudden the feel-good neurotransmitters flow, you know, all the way even into the insula. So we feel really good right down in, you know, kind of into our soul, but particularly down in the viscera. Everything feels good. And we're just in sort of a state of bliss when we get this guy turned off. I was going to say something else. Oh, and then I was just pointing out here, the nucleus accumbens kind of at the tip of the striatum here, you know, where this tension can be really striking, but the nucleus accumbens also filling up the cortical flow of its tracts into the cingulate and down into the insula tends to be very high in dopamine, so big dopamine flow can occur in awe. But I think it's, you know, it's going to be serotonin, it's going to be dopamine. There's probably a nice flow of GABA, and with this type of flow, going to end up seeing acetylcholine, the parasympathetic nervous system, really kick in and get going. So anyway, that's what I wanted to explain to you. Bye.